I'll start in the recording as well. Good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon. Good evening for some of you. Thank you for joining us early on a Monday morning and allowing us to start the week together, which is quite exciting, I have to say. As you will have seen from our email messages, the session today is going to move into a slightly different direction than what we've done up until now. So we've been focusing until now on the legal framework and the institutional framework regulating or supporting the governance of the climate and mobility nexus. And then in the session today, we're going to sort of take a step on the side and look at the role of different actors involved in the nexus. And we're going to start today by looking at the role of social partners specifically, which you have heard us mention several times, which are at the heart of the work that the ILO as a tripartite organization is doing. And so we're particularly happy to be welcoming today our colleagues Irem Arf from the International Trade Union Confederation. Thank you, Irem, for being with us. And Stephanie Winnet from the International Organization of Employers. So we're going to be hearing the perspectives of the two main actors, I would say, in the world of work. All of you by now should already be, I like to call our participants veterans after a while, because you know how our sessions work. You know that we try to encourage as much as possible your own participation, your own active reflection. So please, at any point during the session, which is going to be structured more as a conversation than as a lecture. So I have prepared a few questions for Stephanie and for Irem, but please feel free at any point to raise your hand, request to take the floor, or use the chat to share your comments, your reactions, any experiences that you've had in your own professional context, or any questions, any clarifications that you may need. As usual, we encourage this very much, and we'll be more than happy to give you the floor directly if you are in a position to comfortably open your microphone, and otherwise we can pick up your question from the chat or reaction from the chat and share it with the group. As you know, the session is being recorded and the recording will be posted on the eCampus at a subsequent time. And I'm also stressing this because we have received a couple of requests for sharing privately the links to the recordings. Normally we don't do this, but not because we're mean or we don't want to be available, but simply because the eCampus is really where everything is stored, everything is collected that has to do with this course. So it's very important that for any reason, so it's very important that you are able to access without any trouble the eCampus platform. And then if for any reason you are having any type of trouble in accessing the material, please feel free to let us know. We're going to do our best to ensure that you can access comfortably and without any problems. So with that being said, let us move maybe into the topic that is at the heart of the session today. So once again, thank you both very much for being here. And I'm going to start with a question, maybe to sort of set the scene a little bit to open the discussion to Irem first. We know that a few months ago, ITUC has published a policy brief that is titled specifically Decent Work at the Nexus of Climate Change and Migration. And the objective of the policy brief, which participants, by the way, are going to be able to access and to read from the eCampus as well, just after the end of the session today. The brief outlines a number of solutions that can be offered by trade unions in response to both the challenges but also the opportunities that are posed by mobility that happens in the context of climate change. So it seems like a fit starting point to tell us a little bit about how ITUC, so the International Trade Union Confederation, advocates for the protection of workers' rights in the context of climate mobility. So thank you, Irem, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Miki, for the invitation and letting us to talk about how the workers view the situation in relation to both migration and climate change. I mean, maybe just for those who may not know, ITUC is a global organization that brings together independent national trade union confederations. So we have over 360 national affiliates in over 160 countries, and jointly representing over 190 million workers. In many of those countries, workers are, of course, feeling and experiencing the impacts of climate change, unfortunately, very significantly. So maybe I pull back before getting into how we advocate and what are our key kind of advocacy focus areas. Just sharing a bit about how climate change is already reshaping the world of work and how workers are experiencing these impacts directly and severely. So and how that relates to migration as well. So first of all, of course, workers are experiencing the negative impacts of climate change in their jobs by being exposed to extreme heat, dangerous air quality, and workplaces that are not adapted to the warming climate. But they are also experiencing the impacts in their livelihoods, in their as climate change disrupt businesses, supply chains. Workers are facing unemployment or unstable work in informal economy. And then in migration, so when livelihoods are at places collapsing, workers are then compelled to migrate. They are forced to migrate, often into systems that are exposing them to exploitations. And when workers then move, they face enormous difficulties, not only personal difficulties, as many of you can imagine, that are related to leaving one's home, leaving one's community and loved ones behind, but also serious socioeconomic challenges that are, on the one hand, linked to some deficiencies in the labor market, but also that are linked to migration systems, the migration processes themselves. And I think it's important, maybe you guys have discussed in the previous sessions, but to bring a bit about what migrant workers are facing. So they are often excluded from labor market opportunities. We see that migrant workers are often over-concentrated in low-paid, precarious and informal work, and they are excluded from social protection systems. And also overrepresented in what we call dirty, difficult, and dangerous jobs, which are becoming even deadly with the warming climate. And then in terms of why migrant workers face these disadvantages, difficulties, of course, that relate to either direct or indirect discrimination, language barriers, lack of skills recognition, lack of representation, and even sometimes direct restrictions to work because of migration status. And also what we see is migration policies often widen the power imbalance between workers and their employer. Many labor migration schemes actually tie migrant workers to specific employers, which then affords those employers a huge control over migrant workers themselves. Therefore, complaining or standing up against unfair treatment, abuse, harassment, or dangerous working conditions, or demanding their rights, contains a lot of risks. Migrant workers may lose their work permit, they may lose their residence rights, and they risk detention and deportation. So I wanted to kind of start with this background to paint where our advocacy demands are coming from. So with this background, I think I can say we have like three key but linked in priorities that are connected to climate-driven migration. One, we look at tackling the root causes, the reasons that force people to migrate, and enabling the right to stay if this is what people wish to do. So we insist that migration is a choice and not a necessity for survival. And the way to achieve that we see is through just transition. So trade unions advocate for governments and for employers to adopt zero carbon strategies with consultation with workers and their unions through either collective bargaining or social dialogue systems. And we push for public and private investments and regulations in order to create decent and climate-friendly jobs, but also support skilled and educated workforce through adequate training and lifelong learning opportunities. And of course, we see social protection as a key element in this. So we call for universal social protection so that workers can have the support they need if they have disruptions in their work and livelihoods. So we see these are key so that workers and communities can adapt to the changing climate where they are, rather than being forced to migrate. And with secure jobs and protections at home, we see that forced displacement declines. But of course, where people must or where they want to move as a choice, we demand pathways for migration that are rights-based, that are transparent, and that are designed with workers and their unions. We see these pathways need to ensure protection of all labor rights. As I mentioned, social protection not only important in the context of climate change at home, but also for migrant workers. So the pathways that are designed to move people from one place to another as workers should ensure that they have access to social protection. And of course, as key, freedom of association and collective bargaining. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, currently, many of the labor migration schemes are, especially those that are temporary and employer-tied, they place migrant workers at risk of exploitation. The most recent forced labor data shows that migrant workers are 3 times more at risk of forced labor compared to non-migrant workers. And so the pathways for migration should be fundamentally changed to ensure that migrant workers have full protections. Additionally, we see that when there's a humanitarian crisis, be it because of conflict or as a result of the adverse impacts of climate change, the response, the designed pathways should have the humanitarian need as the basis, rather than what potential markets may need in terms of skills or labor shortages. Of course, they come into the equation, but the primary consideration should be what the needs are for those facing these humanitarian crises. And of course, we also call for gender-sensitive approach for pathway design. As we know, women face different impacts from climate, but also within migration because of gendered stereotypes around care work, for example, and larger risk of exposure to gender-based violence and harassment. So I mentioned 2 areas, ensuring that people have the choice to stay through just transition, and which involves creation of decent climate-friendly jobs and ensuring labor protections. Secondly, where labor migration pathways are designed, these being designed with workers at the table and with full protections of labor rights. And thirdly, when people move, that they have equal rights in countries of destination. For trade unions, for ITUC, all workers, regardless of status, must have equal and enforceable rights. And again, these include freedom of association, collective bargaining, occupational safety and health, which is again very key in the climate change context, non-discrimination, and access to justice without fear of retaliation. And here I want to highlight the importance of union rights, of freedom of association and collective bargaining rights, because these are enabling rights. They allow workers to collectively claim all the other rights, basically. However, what we see is migrant workers are in many cases unable to exercise these rights. But on the other hand, strong union representation is essential to protect the rights, lives, and dignity of migrant workers in a planet that is warming. And these three kind of key areas fit in our main call for a new social contract that is built around 6 pillars, which the first is climate-friendly jobs, the second is rights for all workers, third, living wages for all workers, universal social protection, equality, and inclusion. And this new social contract framework addresses all the structural drivers of climate mobility and strengthens resilience in origin, transit, and destination countries for all workers. In terms of what trade unions do on the ground, they organize and represent migrant workers and all workers. They do discuss and negotiate measures with governments and employers through social dialogue. We provide information and advice through pre-departure training, for example, or post-arrival in destination countries. Trade unions provide legal aid for labor violations, for example, wage theft. They jointly with employers provide vocational and language training, set up skills recognition initiatives, and also there's a lot of cross-border cooperation between unions. So unions in, for example, origin countries cooperate with unions in destination countries to organize workers from certain nationalities and to support them jointly. I think, yeah, this would be the main areas I would want to cover in response to this first question. Thank you very much, Mickey.
Thank you so much, Irem. It was a very comprehensive overview, and thank you for also starting by really trying to set the scene, to highlight the types of challenges and also sort of disparate deficits that migrant workers can face when they are on the move, especially on the move in the context of climate change. And thank you also for for stressing the importance of freedom of association, collective bargaining, as you mentioned, as enabling rights for everything else to be able to be built in an inclusive and coherent way upon it. And I also wanted to let's say to recall one of the points that you also mentioned about the necessary balance that there needs to be, specifically in some situations, the balance between humanitarian response and already putting in place a development-oriented lens and trying to balance the two elements, because this is something that we have unpacked in a little bit more detail in the last session that we've had the previous week, looking very much at the interplay between the humanitarian response, the development aspects, and the peace-related aspects as well. So really trying to adopt this sort of holistic view. So thanks for bringing out all of these elements, and also just looking at my notes as you were notes I took as you were speaking, the mention of universal social protection and its importance in this context specifically. And this is to recall to participants that we're also going to dedicate a specific session to the extension of social protection specifically to migrant workers on the move in the context of the effects of climate change. So just to make the link with the other components and the other elements of this course. So thank you once again. Stephanie, I would maybe now pass the floor to you. And again, as a starting point, I would like to take the policy review that IOE has published again, more or less at the same time. So a few months ago, a policy review that is titled Green Borders. And that contains, again, a number of recommendations to try and ensure that migration systems and policies are fit to meet what is defined in the paper as the climate challenge. So on the one hand, providing migrants with opportunities to contribute to a just transition, but at the same time helping to support local enterprises, economies, and societies. So given that the concept of just transition will be discussed again in more detail in the upcoming sessions, can you tell us a bit about how IOE guides employers in addressing these challenges and these opportunities that are, again, arising in the context of the climate and migration nexus, particularly looking at how it can support in the integration of migrants into the workforce, while at the same time ensuring fair labor practices. And thank you, Stephanie. Over to you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be with ITUC and share our perspectives. So thanks for having us. And you will hear that actually our perspectives are very much similar. So we touched on quite a few points that Irem has also addressed. Our priorities may shift just a little bit, you'll hear. And from the employer's perspective, we always tend to see opportunities in what we all know is quite a challenge. Like climate change is a challenge, but there are opportunities that we're trying to highlight. And you mentioned the paper that we've published. We are going to release a new paper, and we're presenting. We've presented initial findings at the GFMD Summit, the Global Forum on Migration and Development Summit in September, and we will be also showcasing some of the findings tomorrow at COP in Belém for a release by the end of the year, where we're looking at how the recommendations that we have apply to selected countries in Latin America. We're focusing on Latin America and looking at how skills shortages in Latin America could be, to transition to the low carbon economy, could be filled through legal pathways. So I'll share the paper with you, Michela, once it's published, and feel free to disseminate further. Our starting point, really from the employer's perspective, is the reality that there aren't enough skilled workers to meet the demand of the net zero transition. And we have data, that have been published that says that by 2030, the energy sector alone could face a shortage of 7 million jobs. That's from the International Energy Agency. Globally, 16 million workers will need additional training just in the energy sector to keep up. So it's not just one country or one industry. It's not just for developed countries, it's developed and developed economies alike that are struggling to find the right talent. And most national training programs aren't scaling up fast enough. In the US, 87% of companies report that they are currently or soon won't be able to hire workers with the necessary skills to make the transition happen. So our takeaway is really that achieving this net zero and achieving what the governments have committed to and are now discussing at COP currently is impossible without properly skilled workers. And that's exactly where migration enters the conversation.
So we're not saying that migration is a silver bullet and it will solve, the gaps and the issue, but it's a critical piece of the solution. What we see, however, is that current outdated immigration systems often block employers from accessing the global talent they really need. So if we were to align migration systems with the demand for green skills, businesses could accelerate the transition to low carbon economies, creating win-win for everyone, for the government to achieve their commitments, for the employers to be able to hire, and for the workers to be able to work and thrive as well. So what needs to happen? While long-term solutions like upskilling, retraining, and better workforce integration are vital and need to take place, this will take decades. And in the meantime, while we improve all those training, retraining, upskilling, migration can help. And in our report you just referred to, we outline 4 key areas where labor mobility interacts with climate change from the employer's perspective. The first one is labor mobility will be required to fill these skills shortages related to the low carbon transition. Employers need smoother, faster pathways to hire foreign talent with specialized skills. And Iram also referred to that, the pathways that are needed to respond to those needs. The common understanding of the term climate migrant is that it's someone forced to move because of the impacts of climate change. And this doesn't need to always be the case. And as Iram was also saying, migration should not be forced, it must remain a choice. So increasingly, the effects of climate change are driving the demand for migrant labor at every skill level, creating increasingly competitive international labor market. No country currently has sufficient domestic talent in key sectors to address the climate challenge. And again, in most countries, national training and reskilling schemes are not being scaled up at the pace needed to fill the green skills gaps. And at the same time, we see weak institutions or outdated, inefficient migration systems that act as barriers to hiring and training talent at all skills level. So again, better integration between the green skills in demand and legal pathways could help accelerate the green transition and provide decent livelihood for those wishing to move, and also for those who feel the urgency to do so. The second interrelation is related to adjusting to workforce shifts. Climate-related migration affects the size and the composition of different workforces. Large-scale displacements of people can create labor shortages and give rise to potential social unrest, unemployment, and informality. So those movements exacerbate skills gaps in the countries where it happens and skill shortages, and they highlight deficiencies in certification schemes. So what we're looking at is really improved global cross-recognition of skills, which will facilitate labor mobility and the ability of climate migrants to find work that really benefits their skills level. So the skills recognition piece is key to make sure that people can work in the countries of destination. Also, the integration of large groups of migrants into the formal economy will benefit both local economies and the migrants themselves. The third interaction we see is how enterprises themselves are affected by climate change and require policies and measures to deal with relocation and with restructuring challenges. Small and medium businesses are the backbone of many communities. We know that 80% of economies are made of SMEs. So supporting their resilience helps both businesses and their workers to thrive locally. So ensuring a proper environment for businesses, again, especially for SMEs, can facilitate, accelerate and incentivize the development of sustainable enterprises and enable them to remain in their communities. To Iram's point as well, how to make sure that we keep companies as much as we can and where they are to continue to contribute to those societies. And many economies are suffering the consequences of climate change through the impact of extreme weather events on infrastructure, supply chains, and the cost of availability of raw materials. So there are many factors. And of course, SMEs are particularly vulnerable in this regards. And many potential climate migrants will be SME owners or will be employed by an SME. So we need to really make sure that we keep this environment friendly for them to be able to continue their job. The fourth point where we see an intersection is attracting talent through climate leadership. Workers are increasingly drawn to companies that lead on sustainability and net zero initiatives. We see the new generation coming into the market, scrutinizing the markets and the companies. So demonstrating leadership by promoting just transitions can be an important factor in attracting and retaining talent, both to support ongoing business objectives and take advantage of new products, service, and markets created by the green economy. I wanted to give two examples of interesting cases where governments have put in place pathways that do respond to labor market needs and that do safeguard migrants as they move to those countries. And one of them is Egypt, which has expanded the foreign workers percentage for hydrogen production projects. So companies involved in any eligible Egyptian green hydrogen production project are now able to increase the percentage of their workforce, which is comprised of foreign nationals, up to 30% for the first 10 years after signing a green hydrogen project agreement. So they can, now the employers can hire more foreign workers, providing more flexibility with respect to their talent management strategies, including also a greater ability to acquire and retain individuals with those projects' relevant specialized skills. So that's a really good example where quota are being increased and help employers attract the skills that are needed to ensure that transition. And the second example I wanted to raise is from the UAE, which has a blue residency visa. And this is a visa which grants the visa holders a right to reside in the country for up to 10 years, which is also renewable. The blue residency visa will likely increase the attraction and long-term retention of talented individuals in the environmental, climate change, sustainability, or renewable energy sector. So those are two examples, but I'm sure there are many more of governments who are looking at the gaps and looking at what skills are required to transition and designing pathways that are responding to those gaps. And echoing also Iram's point, I think that any such schemes and development of those schemes and design of those schemes needs to be coordinated with employers and workers' organizations to make sure that they take into account the world of work realities and that will ensure at the end the transition to happen in a coordinated and comprehensive way. I'll stop here, Mickey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And indeed, there are maybe a couple of points that I also would like to highlight in your response. Starting from this last one about the importance of social dialogue and inclusion of as you mentioned, the concrete actors, the people who are there on the front line, so to speak, and making sure that their perspectives are correctly reflected and correctly fully taken into account. But also the other point that was interesting for me to hear reflected in both of your interventions was the importance of ensuring that migration is a choice and not a last resort, that happens through an informed process of free decision, and it's not a question of absolute survival. So it was interesting. It was encouraging to see both perspectives reflect that point and bring that to the foreground. And then the other thing that you mentioned that was very interesting to me was this idea of climate leadership and how enterprises can position themselves as leaders in this climate transition and in modeling a just transition. So that was particularly interesting to see, and to see the attractive power that they may have vis-a-vis talent, and also the capacity to retain talent once it is attracted, especially linked to the point that you raised about no country being able to fill the existing demand with the workforce that is available within their borders exclusively. So all interesting points that I think that you have raised. So thanks very much. I'm going to stop for a moment and see if there is any question at this stage from the floor. Any additional question, any moment of curiosity, spark of curiosity, let's say, anything that you would like to know more about, maybe linked to the concrete examples that were just cited, or maybe linked to something else, some of the dynamics. I see that our colleague Paul is also online. So Paul, please feel free also from your side, if there's anything that you would like to comment or contribute, we'd be more than happy to hear. And for participants as well, let me remind you that you can do this in two ways. You can either raise your hand and take the floor directly, or if you're not able to for any reason, you may also use the chat box. But then if there's no question at the moment, maybe I can move to my next one. Maybe one of the things that might be interesting, and this is a bit a question for both of you. So we've heard the perspective of workers, we've heard the perspective of employers. One of the interesting thing would be to hear if you have any examples of successful collaboration between unions and employers in addressing the impacts of climate-related migration. And tell us a bit more about how social partners can collaborate to ensure that these changes, these updates, these transitions indeed in mobility and climate-related policies can, on the one hand, protect jobs and protect workers' rights, and on the other, create new and sustainable employment opportunities. So any experiences that you can share of successful collaboration between the two entities? And Stephanie, maybe I'll let you take a breath and I'll go to Irem first and then I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you again, and I also look forward to reading the new publication from IOE on the topic. It sounds very interesting, and it seems there are also concrete examples there as well. So looking forward to have that. Yes, I mean, I think more generally, I can say that as there is no one fits all solution to these, it's really important to bring all actors that are impacted to the table when climate change and migration is being discussed. And I think we do that in many ways, both at national and global level. I mean, two areas maybe from the work that we have already discussed, in terms of designing and implementing just transition plans. So how these should take place in various sectors, in various workplaces, definitely requires workers and employers to come together. And also at global level, we carry out also joint advocacy with IOE concerning, for example, transformations, recognizing when environmental policies are not adequately designed with both worker and employer voices, they can actually, create more problems than preventing. And another area within both, just transition, but also migration is, as again, Stephanie highlighted, the skills area. We call for equal access to skills training opportunities and lifelong learning opportunities for both local and migrant workers, and the need also to recognize migrant workers' contribution to these transitions, and the need for their recognition of their skills, and their contributions. We, for example, with IOE and other, ILO, IOM, and UNESCO, formed this global partnership on skills in migration, where we're trying to discuss and understand different perspectives and how we can ensure, as again Stephanie highlighted, when skill gaps are addressed in particular location, this does not also create more difficulties for other locations, because as mentioned, the skills needs are across the board in all countries. And when skills are also being discussed, how we ensure the rights of migrant workers are protected as well. And so this is maybe around the just transition side, but in looking at the advocacy around labor migration systems, we jointly address and promote fair recruitment standards, for example, which is important for all workers, but they are even more important in the context of migration, where migrant workers, many have to pay months and months of salaries to be able to get a job, and then they find themselves in debt situations, which leads to also exploitation. We work, trade unions at workplace level set up reporting and grievance mechanisms jointly with employers, and also regularization of undocumented workers. Again, as Stephanie mentioned, formalizing work is one of the ways that is really key to ensure protection of rights of workers, and migrant workers have more barriers to access formal jobs because of, for example, irregular migration status. Another, area we see, as I mentioned, for example, around fair recruitment, I can give is more recently in Ethiopia, the Trade Union Confederation there created with the Overseas Employment Federation, workers and employers organization, a joint migrant recruitment advisory committee to identify risks in the recruitment phase that migrant workers face, and design measures and activities to address those risks. I think these are some of the areas and ideas that come to mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irem. Thank you also for mentioning the fair recruitment, the point around fair recruitment. This is something that, of course, would be where the ILO is taking a lead role, and we'd be more than happy to share with participants links to training toolkits that have been developed around this issue. Of course, the focus in that context is not exclusively around climate-related mobility, but indeed it is a relevant point. Thank you for bringing that up. Stephanie, maybe same question to you. Any examples of successful collaboration? Thank you.
Well, thanks. No, Irem has touched upon many of the points where we work together, and the global skills partnership on migration is really a key one, where we address the skills dimension as well as the protection dimension, and I think this needs to be further strengthened. Fair recruitment initiative, employers are very much engaged in that initiative. Of course, it's not focused on climate change, but any recruitment efforts need to apply to all of the sectors and all of the recruitment, no matter the industry and no matter the environment. So for us, it's really key to make sure that if migration happens within this climate change environment, the recruitment needs to be done in a fair, ethical, responsible way. So again, here it's all about the fact that migrant workers must not pay to have access to a job. So no recruitment fee should be borne by migrant workers. And this applies also in that climate change related environment. On the regularization piece that was also referred to, we have good examples where this has happened, with in consultation with employers federations. And I think it can only happen if the process is dealt with in coordination with the Employers Federation. Some of the best practices in the regularization space comes when actually the migrant workers are working and contributing to the economies already. So looking at criteria for regularization, whereby the workers are working, have a job, have an employer, and would benefit from a regular status. And I think everybody would benefit from that, because it's not in the interest of employers to be in that gray informal zone. So for us, it's also an interesting aspect where this regularization needs to happen in consultation with the employers, making sure that everybody can be again in the good papers. An important piece that we haven't touched upon, where both trade unions and employers organization can definitely team up, is on the education piece. Looking at what type of education or curriculums are needed to train tomorrow's workforce with the skills that are going to be needed in that green transition. So we're not just talking about the solar panel installers and those type of skills that come first to mind, but tomorrow all our jobs will be impacted by this transition, because the economy will shift, the jobs will change, and the education systems and the curricula will also need to change. And I think this is something that we also need to pay a bit more attention on, that skilling journey. So this also includes lifelong learning, lifelong training, to make sure that we are all upskilled with the necessary skills. And then the design of pathways to bring the migrants where the jobs are in that transition. This also needs to be done, as we've both said already, in conjunction with the social partners, making sure that the pathways that are designed do fill the labor shortages, do fill the gaps, but at the same time protect the workers. And I think only through those regular pathways can we talk about, protection, making sure that the migrants are safe in their journey, and make sure that they have the protections that are needed. And those need to be designed in a way that ensures that protection, and also ensures that the employers can bring those skills when and where needed. And maybe a last point that we haven't raised is a joint statement that we've published last year, ITUC and IOE, at the COP last year in Baku, where we really was a call from the social partners to member states to look at the just transition in both the workers and employers lens. And for us, it was really important to keep the employment dimension at the heart of the policy makers. And for that, we needed to have social partners at the table. Any transition policies must be built on the respect and promotion of the fundamental rights defined by the ILO. And we also called parties to send clear signals in their nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, showing commitment to just transition. So I think, there's quite a lot of scope for employers and workers organizations to work together to ensure that the transition happens, and that again that the migrant workers who have to move or who decide to move to contribute to that transition is done in a comprehensive and coordinated way.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you especially for this last point. Again, echoing the points already highlighted by Irem as well about how the process needs to be made as inclusive as possible. And indeed, I think the examples that you've brought to light really highlight that dynamic. I saw that Matthew, you had opened your microphone. I quickly muted you just so that we could allow Stephanie to finish. But if that was a question, please feel free to take the floor. We'll be more than happy to listen. Thank you, Matthew. And at the same time, let me use this moment to also stress to all the other participants that if you would like to share comments or reflections or questions, now is your chance to do so. Matthew, perhaps that was a microphone open by mistake and not by choice. So thanks anyway. And maybe let me then, since we still have a little bit of time, maybe let me ask one more question to both of you. Just as you mentioned a couple of times the COP and the presence of IEOE and ITUC at the COP this year and in years past. So maybe my question to you and to both of you is, can you tell us a bit more about how ITUC and IOE engage in national, but also in international policy dialogues to influence governance frameworks on climate mobility? And also, do you have any long-term strategies for social partners specifically to engage in the global debate on this nexus and this evolving sort of relationship between climate change on one hand and global workforce mobility on the other hand? And again, it's a bit the same question to both of you to see a bit the two perspectives into how the two organizations engage in global dialogue fora. Thank you.
Should I kick off? So
Please.
if we are doing interchangeably. Yes, I mean, we at ITUC, and I know, of course, IOE as well, we engage in these global policy discussions, trying to bring the experience our affiliates at the ground bring to the table. Of course, from the workers' side, we try to interject in all the discussions around climate change or migration, the workers' rights perspective, and making both the transition, but to greener economies, but also migration a just system. You mentioned COP, but there are other global fora at the UN. We just had the World Summit on Social Development, and next year there will be the International Migration Review Forum, which is the kind of high-level meeting where migration, the Global Compact on Migration that governments have adopted in 2018 will be discussed, and how progress around that is happening will be assessed. So we engage in all these areas, bringing the kind of advocacy points that I've been telling around decent work, labor rights protection to these areas. In terms of long-term strategies, I mean, long and short term, I think two key issues remain. we call for social dialogue in every issue that impacts workers. Climate change, migration, as also Stephanie has been saying, it is really key to have employers and workers' organizations, trade unions at the table when these issues are being discussed. This is not only, on the one hand, to find the solutions that are actually needed and sustainable and effective, but also to address, I mean, we're seeing growing skepticism around both climate change, labor rights, gender equality, which are also really important for trade unions, and having the wide variety of actors at the table when these policies are being discussed is one key way to address that skepticism as well, to bring, workers' perspectives, to explain transition to a greener zero carbon economy can be fair and can be just if workers are represented in the discussions is really, really important. So on the one hand that, and on the other hand, of course, ensuring that workers have a voice in their workplaces as well, and freedom of association and collective bargaining rights, again, I want to stress, are really, really key for that, for healthy, functioning workplaces, for also, democratic societies as well. So I think those key two areas will continue across the board in all the different policy areas we work on, that we will continue pushing and highlighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Irem. Stephanie, I see you've already opened your mic. Over to you.
Yeah, no, just to react, I think Irem talked about skepticism. She's very diplomatically correct. I think politically, we're talking about two hot potatoes. We're talking about climate change, which there's a lot of skepticism around, and we're talking about migration, which nobody wants to talk about currently. So I think it's a bomb. we're talking about. Really, it's two hot potatoes that everybody's feel uncomfortable addressing. And what we are trying to do is bring those two very hot potatoes together and look at opportunities that this could bring. So indeed, we do have a climate change agenda. We do attend the COP. We are with ITUC in the ILO pavilion. We hosted a pavilion also last year at the COP in Baku. We do have this just transition agenda, but as much as we can, we try also to link it to our migration agenda, which happens in other places, at the Global Forum on Migration and Development, among others. And what we're trying to do at the IOE is really to combine and bring wherever we can those two topics in those global forums. Indeed, also last week in Doha, but I think at the World Social Summit in Doha. But I think really, when we speak about migration, the climate change angle comes very often because we see opportunities, people being able to contribute to this transition, but also the challenges that go with that. I also wanted to flag one initiative that also exists, which is the Green Horizon platform, of which IOE is part of, which looks at designing pathways to make this transition possible through potentially displaced talent. So we're not looking only at migrants, but at talent which is displaced somewhere in the world that needs to also have a living and could potentially contribute to this net zero transition, provided that their skills could be utilized where the jobs are. And here we're very much engaged to make sure that the pathways are designed in a way that can respond to those needs. And what we also do for our own members, so looking at the employers federations in 140 plus countries, looking at raise that also on top of their agenda, on top of their priorities. And we've started to do that with our paper highlighting the skill shortages in Latin America, so focusing on 5 countries in Latin America, and see how migration could help. So I think Again, it's somehow difficult to link those two topics together because there is skepticism all around. But it is our role, I think, as social partners to bring it at the table and to try as much as we can to move away from the politics and focus on the people, on the people who are moving, on the employers who are also struggling in that context, and on helping governments to achieve their net zero transitions.
Thank you, Stephanie. And it's very inspiring for me to hear this point about moving from politics to people. It echoes. So I was involved, a little side note, I was involved in a training on the ECOWAS General Convention on Social Security last week, 10 days ago, more or less. And one of the main points that came out of the discussion was it's time to move from paper to people. So I like this idea of the transition, no, from all start with P, from politics, from paper, but keeping in mind that at the heart of what we do is always there's always people. So it's very, in a way, heartwarming for me to see the same concept being brought out in two wildly different contexts that have little to do with each other at this stage, but still good to see the linkages. I'm going to stop again for a moment to see if there's any reaction from the floor or from Paul, if you're in the background, and if you would like to intervene, please feel free. I see that you have raised your hand, so please, over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Mickey. Yeah, I thought it would be a good opportunity. Sorry, my camera doesn't seem to be working. I'm working from home. But yeah, first of all, I wanted to really thank both Irem and Stephanie for their inputs. I think it's always been an interesting experience for me because I came from outside the ILO not so long ago still. Before I always thought, oh, the employers and the workers, they must have like totally different perspectives on things, and it must just always be a big fight. But actually, one of my big learning experiences here has been to see how there is this convergence and how in fact they bring very complementary perspectives to the issues we address. And I think the other one has been, I think really sort of the important message here is again just how much of this issue, which is seen in this sort of very high level abstract way, this transition that we're talking about, is fundamentally a labor market issue. So it's really about, the workers and the employers who are going to be doing the day to day, the nitty gritty of this whole transition, and so why it is so important to bring them into these conversations. And I do think this is something where we do still have a long way to go. We don't generally see that in, for example, the developing nationally determined contributions or in national adaptation plans, that there's a sort of systematic thinking that we should have employers and workers brought in. Civil society, yes, environmental groups, yes, but not the employers and workers. And so this is something that we advocate for very strongly because there are these perspectives that only they can really bring, and that really, really are critical to the success of any of these schemes. And this is one of the points I was trying to make here, is that social dialogue, I think, can sometimes be seen as, another step that holds things up. But I think the reality is it's an acceleration of the process because, again, if we are setting goals that are completely unrealistic, that are not grounded in reality, well, of course, we're going to be, we're not going to get anywhere. But if we bring people along, and I mean, maybe just tying to that last point that Stephanie made about how we are dealing with two hot potatoes at once, just, as if one of them alone wasn't difficult enough. But here we bring in perhaps those who might be more skeptical, right? We give them the space to express, their challenges, and to sort of develop solutions that are ultimately kind of accepted by everyone, which they can then also sell to their constituencies who may be more skeptical. So I think that's also an important point and an important added value that I really wanted to stress. I'll leave it there, but thank you very much again, both to Stephanie and to Im. It's always great to sort of hear your perspectives, and thanks again, Miki.
Thank you, Paul, for your, I think it was also a nice wrap up of the conversation that we've had this morning. Let me then take this opportunity to say once again a very big thank you to Irem and to Stephanie for joining us today, for sharing their experiences and their thoughts on the topic. Thank you, Paul, also for providing this very nice wrap up. Thank you to the participants who joined. Indeed, as I mentioned, the recording will be posted on the eCampus later today, together with the accompanying material that we mentioned. So the 2 policy briefs, the module for this week, and all the remaining material for the week, which will be opened, as I said, on the platform later today. We have our upcoming webinar. The second webinar this week will take place instead of Wednesday due to organizational reasons on Friday. However, if you wish to use the slot on Wednesday morning to work on your group assignments, please let us know and we can arrange that for you so that you have a space online that you can use to discuss live with your group members if that's something that you think might be beneficial for your group discussions. With that, I'm going to officially close the session for today. Thank you all very much and see you online towards the end of this week. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.